Okay, so we're recording. Thank you everyone for joining us today for another one of our Therapist Connect broadcasts. Today is another interview that we've got, a lifetime achievement interview with Janet Tolan, which I'm delighted to have here today. We've broadcast lots of different events this week with Therapist Connect. So if you'd like to catch up on those, please go to our YouTube channel and you can see all the other events that we're broadcasting this week and some other bookable events. So check out our website, which is running across the screens at the moment. But today I'm going to be interviewing Janet Tolan. So Janet has worked in counselling since 1979, first as a volunteer, then as a full-time counsellor. And she qualified in 1984 and completed her supervisor training in 1988. She has been a leader of multiple counselling courses, such as the City College in Manchester, and the head of the Master's Programme in Counselling and Psychotherapy at Liverpool John Moores University, where I now teach. Janet is the author of multiple books around person-centred counselling, including Skills in Person-Centred Counselling and Psychotherapy, and Client Issues in Counselling and Psychotherapy Person-Centred Practice. She is a former governor of BACP and is now a fellow of BACP, as well as a senior accredited registrant of the National Counselling Society. She's previous board members of the World Association. Janet is the current trustee of the Person-Centred Association and was their previous chair. My favourite quote that I've seen from you, Janet, is when you were asked about person-centred therapy, she said, "My perspective on person-centred therapy is very simple. It works." So thank you very much for coming and doing this interview today to kind of talk a little bit about your career and reflect on some of those achievements. My first question is going to be around when you first qualified as a therapist, really, and what brought you to therapy, and what made you want to train as a therapist?
I needed a job.
Yeah. Mm.
I'd done a voluntary training with Rape Crisis in Manchester. Mm-hmm. I'd done a certificate in drama therapy. And I was working as a basic education teacher. Mm-hmm. And doing about anything between 20 and 24 hours a week. I had young children, so working around, looking after kids. And the NATFE, the union, agreed with the employers that if you were doing more than 12 and a half hours a week, you had a permanent contract. Right. So, of course, they didn't issue permanent contracts. They just cut everyone's hours down.
Yeah.
So I needed to earn some money.
Yeah.
And a full-time counselling job was the first one I got. And I wasn't trained at the time. So actually the first thing I did was say, I need some training.
Yeah.
Such was the difference in those days that counselling was something that was not well understood. Mm. And it was almost like every time two people were in a room together, it was called counselling.
Yeah.
And the specific job was, for those of you a bit long in the tooth like me, on a YTS program. So I was a counsellor on a YTS program.
Right.
So that's how I started out.
Well, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because now, obviously, you do need the qualifications to work as a therapist, unless you're in training, obviously. So that was kind of the 1980s is when you kind of first qualified. But obviously, you've had a really kind of distinguished career since then, and specifically around person-centered therapy. I'm wondering what has kept you kind of within that person-centered kind of frame or community for all of those years, because it's a long time to stick with that one approach, isn't it?
Well, in a way, I didn't. I've done all kinds of other trainings, Gestalt, transaction analysis, psychodrama, and each time you do a training, you kind of try and incorporate what you're learning. And the feedback from clients basically said, you know, cut the crap. We like it best when you, you know, essentially what they were saying was staying in their frame of reference, empathy, the relationship were the important things for them. And the more I've gone on, the more I found that that's true, that's what helps people. And everything else is a bit window dressing, really. And as a new therapist, I think I certainly almost didn't feel good enough, that somehow person-centered wasn't enough and I needed to do some more. But one of the really interesting things was in 1995, I attended a huge psychotherapy conference in Hamburg with a group of people. And lots of very experienced people from, you know, different theoretical backgrounds. Every time they either showed a video of their work or did a demonstration, I thought that's person-centered. So it's almost as though really experienced practitioners could somehow let go of the technique-y stuff and just be with their clients, just, you know, hold the distress, hold the pain, hold the confusion, and stay with it and trust that their clients would find a way through.
I think that's really interesting, and something I've noticed, actually, I've spoken about this earlier this week as well, about my work with the Therapist Connect community and meeting hundreds of different therapists this year and talking to them about their practice. And although they might describe it in slightly different ways of what's influenced them, underpinning all that is the importance of the relationship, their empathy for their clients, building up that trust, and how much similarity I found actually in all of those descriptions and how people worked, despite how they might describe it,
yes,
you know, in a slightly different way or talk about it from a different modality. So it's almost like, I feel almost like you're person-centered at the core, but then there's other possible aspects there around your practice as well. But actually, the core of it is person-centered.
Oh, I think mine is pretty much person-centered now. I think I kind of left the other stuff behind, if I put it that way.
And
also,
the other,
I'm quite a noisy person-centered therapist. In the sense that I'm not a Rogers clone. I'm very active in the relationship. I kind of do a lot of empathizing, a lot of I use my imagination a lot. So as an example, if someone says, oh, you know, I don't go out, I might say something like, oh, right, okay, so you're there staring at the same four walls all the time. Do you know what I mean? So it's like really trying to put yourself into someone else's shoes, and then they might correct it and say, oh, no, I do cooking. Or do you know what I mean? But you're kind of, for me, I'm really trying to get in there with somebody, and I've been accused in the past of not being person-centered because I don't just stick with what they've told me. And by that people mean don't just stick with the words. And no, I don't. I mean, I'm trying to get underneath the words and into the experience. And my response to that has always been, okay, which one of the 6 conditions do you think I'm not compatible with? Because as far as I'm concerned, the theory is the important thing. I don't care how Rogers did it. I don't care how anyone else does it. For me, the theory is the important thing, and the theory is what guides me.
I absolutely love that. I love the description of a noisy person-centered therapist. I like that. But I'm also just thinking about when I'm working with students, how for me it's about each of those people is unique, you know, in terms of how they will interpret, how they will, because we're all unique individuals, and so each therapeutic process and work with a client is completely unique. So I don't think we can all be cardboard cutouts of Rogers. You know, I don't think that would work for everybody.
And my biggest question for students in the, you know, when we were in groups listening to tapes that they'd made, which they were in those days, there'd be audio recordings now, wouldn't they?
And videos.
Yeah, sure. Was, what are you hearing? Because I think with students, well, with anyone really, we're sometimes more attuned to some feelings than others. And when other people in the group are hearing somebody being angry and some people aren't, you know, that's interesting, isn't it? It's, you know,
those different perceptions of what's going on in that same moment.
Yeah. And sometimes you just need to expand your perceptions a little bit. If you're better at hearing grief than you are hearing anger, or, you know, all of that, that's all, for me, it's part of the development.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like you really enjoyed teaching.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah.
I think it's an absolute joy, and I think as well as helping students to learn, I really appreciate learning from them as well, and kind of what all that experience that people bring with them.
When I started learning, you know, I think when students ask the questions that you've never even thought of, you think, what a bloody good question that is.
Yeah,
we don't need to go away and think about that one.
Yeah. It's a two-way learning process, isn't it?
Always. Yeah.
I just also wanted to follow up on a point that you made earlier as well, which was that idea when you first qualified that you had this sense that person-centered wasn't enough, and that you needed more. And I see that as well sometimes in students. It's almost kind of like, I'm about to qualify, but actually there's so much more out there. I need to go and read and do these other courses and search for this extra information. And I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of students do come back later to say that they did all of that, but then actually kind of returned back to those core person-centered principles, because actually sometimes that's all there was to hold on to when working with a client. That all that other stuff, yeah, it can be important, but actually underneath it all, it was the person-centered principles that helped them with their clients.
And that's the thing that works. I mean, the research is kind of says that over and over again.
Yeah. The relationship.
And I think it's our insecurities that make us reach for other things, techniques, or, you know, kind of like feeling, you know. But yeah.
It's really interesting. So thinking about your career, so we talked a little bit about your teaching, but I'm just wondering, what is your kind of proudest thing that you've done in your career, or your biggest achievement? Because you've done a lot.
I was going to say, I don't think there is anything.
Okay.
You know, there have been quite a few things, not all of them in counselling. You know, I kind of the work that I did won my college a national training award. I worked at the airport in management development. And that was because someone on a certificate course said to me at the end of the year, Janet, that is the best management training I've ever done. Will you come and do some with, you know, my staff team? So I kind of got into management development, and won a national training award.
Fantastic.
And then seconded to Manchester Airport, which was fun for a while, but then I wanted to get back to counselling. It really made me realise what a privileged occupation counselling is. There's an intimacy to it that just doesn't exist elsewhere. you know, as a management development person, it's, you know, it's great and you can do lots, but you can see things and you can't go there because that's not the contract.
I think that's really interesting that kind of, because what I've looked at is kind of some of your achievements was in the person-centered world and community and those kind of things. But obviously you have had a broader career than that with other things as well.
I started the first women-only engineering course in the country.
That's fantastic. I didn't know that about you.
Counsellor. And that arose from the fact that the college I was working at did a reorganisation.
Yeah.
And they reorganised all the maths, engineering, science courses onto one site.
Right.
It was all men.
Yeah.
I thought if a woman wanted to follow any of these paths, it would be so intimidating. Mm-hmm. So that was where the women's taster course in engineering came from.
Fantastic.
They got European funding for that, otherwise the principal wouldn't have even listened to it. Yeah. I said, oh, I think we should do something like this. Oh, right, we can't afford it. I can get money. Oh, okay.
Their interest peaked at that point, did it?
Always the way, isn't it? He was not interested in changing the pictures on the walls to reflect, you know, women doing those engineering science things. That was, you know, it's like that's beneath the notice. But get European funding and run a new course. Have that.
Yeah. That sounds fantastic. Is there any other aspects of your career then, maybe outside? I'm just thinking there might be more surprises here that I don't know about that you can tell us about. So moving a little bit then back to kind of person-centered discussions. I'm quite interested to hear how you perceive the person-centered community now kind of in 2020, 2021, and whether you think it has maybe changed over the time that you've been involved with it, I suppose.
Yeah, well, it's certainly more beleaguered now than it was. Although there's always been there's always been a kind of implicit hierarchy in some people's minds. Like I was a person-centered therapist when I was a baby counsellor, but now I've grown up, I'm a gestaltist or a, you know, so that there's always been a little bit of that around, I think. Actually, the other thing I've done is in the late 80s, my dear friend Susie Lendrum, who was running the course in Manchester at the Polytechnic at the time, and she's a dear friend now. That was how we kind of came across each other. Were at a conference to do with counselling training, run by the then HMI. That was in the days before Ofsted, when we had Her Majesty's Inspectorate. There was an HMI responsible for counselling, whose name was Elizabeth, whose surname, I'm sorry, I just can't remember. And we said to her, look, there's no kind of external validation for counselling courses. And she just turned around and said, well, do one. So we did. And that was the first validation scheme for counselling training. And that eventually got taken over by, I think ABC at one point. Anyway, it grew and grew, but it was one of those learning experiences where what we were concerned about was really making sure counselling training, and Susie, by the way, was a psychodynamic therapist. Okay. And one of the, again, it's, you know, when we actually talked about what we did, there was very little difference, you know? So it broke down a lot of my prejudices, I suppose, about psychodynamic, and possibly even hers about person-centered, I don't know. So we devised this scheme to accredit initially it was certificate courses in counselling. And of course, we were turning them down all the time because at the time there was such an expansion that college principals, polytechnic principals, people in hierarchies were saying, "Oh, there's a real demand for counselling courses," and they would point to the nearest psychologist or social worker and say, "Oh, right, run a counselling course." And so, of course, when we were looking at these courses, we were saying, well, actually, it's not a counselling course. Well, not yet. And, this is what you need to do, and we'll support you and all the rest of it. But the body, which at the time was the Northwest Regional Advisory Council, all the areas had regional advisory councils, wanted to make money, and they didn't like us turning courses down because then they didn't get the income from the course itself, and then from every student there was income. And so they appointed a chair who wasn't us. And whenever we turned a course down, they approved it on chair's action when we'd gone. So we just, we resigned and let them get it. Yeah.
And that sense of courses being set up which don't really meet the standards for good counselling and psychotherapy.
And it's one of the things that I think BACP is really can't think of the word. Anyway, any other course accredited by BACP, there would be considerable effort, I suppose, made to ensure if it was a Gestalt course, it was a Gestalt course. That the people running it were Gestalt trained, and that's what it was. Person-centered, it felt like anyone could say they were person-centered and get a BACP accredited course.
And why do you think that is? Do you think it was taken less seriously than some of the other?
Because I think person-centered to so many people meant the core conditions. Even when I was running the master's program in Liverpool, I was getting people coming saying, "Oh, I'd like to join the second year because I've done the first year elsewhere," and I'd say, "Okay, what do you understand by person-centered?" And they'd kind of burble along a bit, and I'd say, "What role do you think the actualizing tendency has to play?" And they'd say, "Oh, actualizing, I'm sure we've covered that." Sorry, but if you want to join the course, it has to be at the first year because that's when we do the theory.
It's really interesting, I think, with students sometimes when you kind of present the 6 necessary and sufficient conditions and some of the principles of person-centered theory, which on the surface may seem simple. It may seem like a very simple theory. But then, as you see, as students delve into the reading and the exploration and how that actually works in principle, that actually how complex that can be. And actually, it does take a lot of work actually to understand really what's going on theoretically and also in practice as well, I think. Yeah,
I agree. And how nuanced it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why I think we still have person-centered courses that teach if they do loss and grief, they do it from a psychodynamic perspective. If they do trauma, they do it from a cognitive behavioral perspective, and it's not a person-centered course unless you understand all of those things through person-centered theory, which is perfectly capable of explaining and understanding all of those phenomena.
Absolutely. And so do you think then, has the perception of person-centered counselling changed then, do you think, over the time? Or do you feel like it's always had the same people always have the same perception, or the counselling community maybe has the same perception that it's less than some of the other modalities.
I think it's difficult to separate out person-centered, what I would call proper person-centered theory and practice, from the fact that a lot of people think they've done a person-centered course and are practicing person-centered and don't understand the theory very well. You know, and I do think that just rumbles on. It's interesting though that because I've been involved in various initiatives, including NVQs, and the consultants to the NVQ process, after this had been going on for probably 2 or 3 years, said that the person-centered practitioners were the most consistent and coherent of all the practitioners who were involved in the process.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Talking about, well, I suppose we talked about the person-centered community in a way, but you're also a trustee, but a chair, or your previous chair of the Person-Centered Association.
Very briefly.
Okay. But you've been involved, you're very involved with that as an organisation. So do you want to kind of maybe tell people who might be listening a little bit about that and kind of how it works, what it's about? I think just because it might be interesting for listeners out there to kind of hear a little bit more about that.
Well, it's the Person-Centered Association, and we're kind of inclusive person-centered of the whole family of person-centered therapies, including person-centered experiential practitioners. We've been active politically, as you know, with the letter about Scoped. And we got an enormous number of signatures, which was great. And partly we're involved as well, of course, in PCE Europe. We're one of the constituent organisations, and lots of the PCE Europe organisations signed the letter. So we're in touch with all of that. We have a quarterly newsletter for members. And from January, we've also negotiated a very, very favourable rate if members want to subscribe to the Person-Centered Experiential Psychotherapies Journal, which is the World Association Journal. So, sign up now.
It's fantastic. And I believe as well, is it, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it free for students for the first?
For the first year, it's free for students, yes.
Which I think is a fantastic offer for students, actually, because it gives them the opportunity to see what you're about and kind of access all those resources through their training. So, which is really brilliant. And do you have regular meetings as well, Janet? Is there kind of events that are run by the PCA?
We're looking at setting up a CPD program from probably next February, March time. And we're hoping to kind of bring in, lots of significant people from person-centered people internationally. I'm hoping Margaret Warner's going to do something for us, for example. Probably Elizabeth Summerbeck. I'll see whether she's willing to take part. So, we also ran a person-centered trainers conference, which of course had to be cancelled this year just gone. But hopefully again, 30th of June next year, be there or be square.
I think what's really lovely about that is actually there isn't always that opportunity for trainers, lecturers in the person-centered approach to come together actually. Working kind of in separate organisations, but an opportunity to come together and talk about their practice, developments within the field, new ideas, things like that, and just share their work really, and what's happening out there. So I think that's a fantastic opportunity for anyone who hasn't been there before.
And share methods and exercises that they've found useful and things like that. I mean, in fact, on the last day, we got people saying, "Oh, can we do this twice a year?" Only if you want to organise it.
Yeah, it's always a good sign, though, isn't it? With people asking for more.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. People were buzzing because of that ability to connect with other people in the whole education field, and also share some of the difficulties with organisations. I mean, that is a big difference between now and in the 80s. There's no slack in the system now. In the 80s, there wasn't the same pressure to do more and do more and do more and do more. I don't think if it was happening today, I'd have a hope in hell of starting a women's engineering course, because of the amount of work it involved, applying for funding and all the rest of it. I've always worked long hours, but the extra hours were always on things I wanted to do, not to do the basic job.
I was just thinking then as well, when you were talking about the stresses on educators and teachers, and also I think sometimes that the organisations that we work in, whether it's universities, colleges, whatever, don't always necessarily understand the principles behind person-centered teaching, our approach, what the numbers of students that we're trying to keep to a small amount, so we can have that close interpersonal relationship, and some of those pressures to kind of increase course numbers and change your teaching program to fit the organization rather than stick with the principles of person-centered teaching. And so I mean, I've been to that conference before, and kind of having other people to talk to about that and share those experiences, and maybe just get a bit of advice actually around how they might have tackled something in the past, I think was really useful actually for me. So
and trying to explain to the hierarchy in organisation how multi-layered what we do is, because we're not just teaching it, we're modelling it. All of our interactions with students have to kind of model what we're doing. So it's not like teaching a maths lesson where you just kind of like, right, there's the information. It doesn't matter how I am or who I am with you. I'm just and the other thing is that's happened over the years, on a number of occasions, as a course leader, I've had the hierarchy come and say, "Oh, well, there's so-and-so, he's really nice, or she's really nice, and we think she'd really, do well as a member of your course team." And I learned to say, "Oh, why don't you see whether the physics course team can take her?" And you could see that, "Oh, but she's not trained in physics." Oh, okay. Yes, exactly. We've all done 3 or 4 years training to be person-centered therapists.
And that misunderstanding that someone's a therapist or a social worker or can transfer into any type of course of that nature, and how even our own courses are very distinguished compared to maybe other therapy courses. They're very different in that respect as well. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions within education around what we do on our course, and I think you're right there as well in terms of how well we get to know our students as well, because we have to, because of the nature. But we really once they qualify, we've known them, we've seen them go through their own process, and really understand them, and they know a lot about us as well.
Cool. That whole relationship stuff, it doesn't stop with clients, does it?
Exactly. It's in everything that we do. So one of the other things that I wanted to ask you about, which you maybe touched on a little bit, we haven't quite mentioned the word yet, but was some of the difficulties that you think that the profession faces at this moment in time, not just necessarily person-centered community, but the broader counselling and psychotherapy profession. But also as well, I wondered, whatever you thought that they might be, but also your reflections on how that's maybe changed over time and the time that you've been involved with counselling and psychotherapy.
Well, the pressures are all financial, and those have grown and grown and grown through the years. Back in the day, we had a counselling team in the college, further education college. And when the local mental health services couldn't cope because they had quite a lot of respect for our work, they used to tell people to sign up for a course and then they could get counselling, open-ended counselling with us. And the pressure now on counselling services everywhere, including in colleges and universities, it's more time limited, it's more, it's all finance driven. It's all finance driven. And I think that's the big danger. The other thing that I think happened, again, as a result of the financial pressures, all the statistics that were gathered in the 70s and 80s when counselling was open-ended, and it didn't matter where that was, in GP surgeries, in colleges, wherever it was, when that was always self-selected, it was open-ended, the number of sessions that clients opted for, because it was their choice, always came out between 6 and 8. 6.2, 7.3, whatever it happened to be, but that was the norm for self-selected. And some stupid manager decided that, everyone should have 6 sessions. So, of course, what happened was that when people were told they could have 6 sessions, they made sure they had their 6 sessions. They didn't stop after 1 or 2, as happened when it was, selected. They did it until they'd had what they needed, and then they went away. So, it really is like saying to a surgeon, it doesn't matter whether your patient is well or not at the end of it, but you've only got 2 hours for every operation. Yeah.
I think that's really interesting comment. And I had worked with some voluntary organisations who have had open-ended sessions and allowed clients to go on for as long as they wanted. Because obviously money's getting tighter, and they decided that they were going to limit those sessions. And I think some of them limited to like 24 sessions, which is still a lot actually. But they actually found that the length of time people were having those sessions went up, because then there was a figure set of what you could have.
Yes.
So all of a sudden, actually, it was almost like a target to work towards, rather than actually you finish your sessions. When you finish your sessions is when you're ready. But I do think it's quite rare now to have those voluntary organisations go beyond 6 sessions. I hear that all the time, particularly in Liverpool, reducing down. They might have been offering 10, now they're offering 8, or they're offering 6. And actually, when you get a client come to that service who's got very, complicated things that they need to talk about, and can only have 6 sessions, it's very hard to open up and go into any detail, I think,
and much harder to come out the other end.
Yeah.
And in fact, I suspect that the people who are doing the most kind of long-term, in-depth work now are students.
Yeah.
Certainly, my supervisees who are students are doing some brilliant long-term work with people who just, these statutory services haven't touched it, haven't even scratched the surface because of all this time-limited stuff. Yeah.
And the waiting lists for other services within the NHS and things like
that. And what, sorry?
Waiting lists as well before they get to see anybody.
Yeah. Again, one of something that happened to me 2 or 3 times a while ago, was because people were put on the waiting list to see a psychiatrist, and they would find their way to me just to get something.
That goes back to the point you were making. I mean, that goes back to the point you were making earlier about the not being taken seriously by some professionals, you know, our role and what we do. And as you say, as I said in your quote at the beginning, we know that it works, you know, because we see it every day. You know.
But in a way, that is the difficulty, because you only know it works if you've genuinely tried it. And in order to do that, you either have to have a course where the tutors know it works and will keep the students, you know, I say to kind of students, empathy, empathy, empathy. Don't worry about doing anything else, just empathy. And once they see that it works, you know, it's a kind of self-fulfilling thing. Yeah. But if you never get to that stage, if you start pulling in techniques and, you know, bits from cognitive behaviorism or whatever else it is you're doing on your course, you will never have that experience. And I think it's really hard work to stay with a client who's very distressed, you know, who's in an enormous amount of pain. You want to do something for them. Yeah. And really staying in their frame and holding that distress, holding that pain, and seeing that they come out the other end better and happier. If you never go through that and you never see the outcome, how can you trust?
Yeah. And I think that's very difficult sometimes, even for students. And I probably imagine in my own training that happened as well, as you can see the principles in it, but it's, you know, trusting in it, it's very, very hard until you've gone through that yourself as a client, actually, or as a therapist as part of your training, and seeing actually they were with me through all of those ups and downs, and actually come out the other side. It's very powerful, isn't it, to be able to
incredibly powerful.
Experience it rather than just be told it works.
And this is the real difficulty I've got with competence-based systems, including scoped. But what I
thought we'd mention it at some point.
What I do for 90% of the time is exactly that: staying in my client's frame of reference, empathy, holding the pain, holding the distress. And a competence-based system looks at all the things around the edges, ticks the boxes of, you know, can you do a contract? Can you hear? Yeah, it's all that kind of stuff. It's like, how on earth are you going to assess? Often it's one or two phrases, sort of develop and maintain the relationship. Tick.
And also in those competency-based frameworks, it, in my view, gives an advantage to people who are better at that analytical, maybe describing, tick boxing, you know, maybe even writing an essay, actually, you know, who do all of that work. And actually, but that's not really what our work is about. Yes, some of that might be important, but actually, really, it's about your warmth, the empathy, being able to build a relationship with a person. And I agree with you. I don't really think that you can put that in a competency framework.
That's the heart of it, isn't it? And I don't know how you assess that in one of those frameworks.
Yeah, no, I agree.
The good thing, of course, talking about all of this stuff, is that in IAPT, the NICE committee, has accepted person-centered therapy up to 20 sessions, and the research evidence is very good.
Yeah.
So that's a chink of light.
It is. And Do you think, as a person-centered community, as person-centered therapists, do you think we need to be better at playing the game to try and get our people to acknowledge the value of what we do?
I think one of the characteristics, if I can put it that way, of the person-centered community is that we often don't take our authority. And actually taking our authority and standing up for what we do and why we do it, and the evidence for it, and arguing the case is something we need to do more of.
And it's really hard, that, because even as you're describing that to me, all those words that you're saying, they feel counterintuitive, I think, to a person-centered therapist who is constantly trying to not be an expert, not kind of, guide something, take control of the relationship. So in some ways it feels counterintuitive.
Yes, exactly. And I think there's a huge difference between, I didn't do all those years training and pay all that money not to have some authority and some expertise. I'm not an expert in my clients.
Yeah.
But I bloody know what I'm doing. And that's what we need to stand up for. We know what we're doing. We know it works. The evidence is there. That, for me, is where the authority comes. Not telling clients what to do.
It's that word, isn't it? And talk about this with students as well, is there's power in all different types of relationships. And it's how you use that, not necessarily because it will be there anyway, but it's how you use that power in what you do. It could be fighting anti-oppressive practice, say, for example, or it could be, trying to evidence that your approach does work and it is valid and that it should be shared more widely. So there's ways to use your power in a positive way. It's not always an oppressive thing to do.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing we're not terribly good at, I think, sometimes is angry feelings. And angry feelings, recognizing angry feelings in clients and acknowledging those. I mean, 19 propositions, anger is one of the feelings that stops us from putting up with something we shouldn't be putting up with. And where would we be if Mandela hadn't been angry, or, Emmeline Pankhurst, or all the other people that have changed the world?
No, I think that's really interesting.
Let's be angry. Let's be authoritative in the right circumstances.
Yeah, and that's the balance, isn't it? Of trying to find where that energy is focused and what it's kind of put into. And I think maybe as person-centered therapists, maybe we struggle with that sometimes.
Absolutely.
To figure out what to do with it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think part of that stems from Rogers, I have to say. That man was a very astute political operator. He got to be president of the APA, for heaven's sake, So this idea that he was always meek and mild, I kind of struggle with that a bit.
Yeah. But because I think you're right, to get to a position like that, actually, you have to use some of your power. And
his name was on everything.
It was,
There was a whole team, but he's the one. There's a cultish bit that I actually think does the approach a lot of damage. There have been a lot of thinkers and writers over the past 50, 60 years.
It's interesting that, because I was speaking to somebody else the other day around this idea of actually sometimes it can feel more important sometimes to a therapist's identity to hold on to, Carl Rogers' approach or whatever, rather than, like you were talking about before, the principles around what that's about as a practitioner, and I do think you're right there in terms of we need to be critical thinkers. We need to critique Rogers, and we need to, you know, look at it in a fresh light, because he was doing that all of the time. He was a critical thinker, you know.
Yeah. We're talking about him irritates me.
Why does it irritate?
If you talk with psychodynamic people, they're not always referring back to Freud. If you talk with gestaltists, you know, they're not always talking about what Pearls did and what Pearls said. It's that kind of thing. It's like, let's move on. What's important is the theory.
Yeah.
You know, is it consistent with the theory?
Yeah. I won't mention him again in your presence, Janet. Oh dear. So we're coming to the end of our kind of nearly an hour now, which is just absolutely flown by. I've really enjoyed chatting. I suppose to end, I was wondering whether there was, and this might be quite difficult to answer maybe, but if we've got any students out there or people thinking about entering into person-centered training, maybe, is there any advice that you would potentially give to people who are thinking about just starting out on that journey of training to be a person-centered therapist?
I think find the right training course with the right tutors. You know, that has to be, I mean, one of the things that we're looking at the moment in the Person-Centered Association is having some kind of recognition scheme, which will be based almost exclusively, because most courses now have external validations and so on, would be based on whether it's person-centered. You know, it's what I was saying earlier. Are you teaching person-centered theory? Are you encouraging students to look at all the phenomena in the light of person-centered theory rather than, you know, psychodynamic or anything else?
Yeah.
And that way, hopefully, we'll be able to say, this is a person-centered course. It's not integrative. It's not, you know, person-centered light with bits of this and bits of that. Yeah.
And I think that's really important, because actually, for me, speaking to lots of different students over the past 12 months, actually trying to understand what a course offers, I actually think is really problematic. I think students find it very confusing. And actually, we probably, I think, generally in psychotherapy education, need to be much more clearer and explicit about what the course is, what it offers, and maybe what it doesn't offer, so that students can make that informed choice. Because the amount of students that I hear who kind of start a course and then oh, well, this is not what I thought it was, you know, but feel so far down the road now that actually, oh, I'll just finish and kind of carry on. So no, I think that's really important, and it'd be interesting to see how the PCA does that. Yeah.
Keep your fingers crossed.
I will.
That you do it well and that it has an impact.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I feel like I'm cutting this interview short, because I feel like we could sit and talk for another hour. So first of all, thank you so much for doing this. I really enjoyed talking to you and hearing a little bit about your career and your opinions on some of the topics we've talked about.
It's a wonderful thing being semi-retired.
Well, I'd love to hear more of them another time, Janet, definitely. For anyone who's watching, thank you for the Therapist Connect community for watching. You can either watching this live, but if you've missed some of it, you can catch up on our YouTube channel, where we'll leave this open for anyone to be able to see. And yeah, Janet, just thank you again. Thank you very much.
Talking with you.
Okay.
I'm sure we'll catch up again soon.
We will. Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.